I hope all of you had a really awesome spring break. Oh, this is Boo. Say hello, Boo. Hello. Anyway, so again, hope you guys had a great spring break, and today I have an activity for you that is going to be basically a really good practice activity if you're really serious about wanting to become a better artist and become a better drawer, okay? So this is basically the project so far, and it looks a little bit complicated, but I promise you that it's actually not. It's basically, again, like in other videos, it's the same thing repeated over and over again. But essentially what I really want you guys to focus on with this is learning how to shade. So I'm going to show you and demo exactly what shading is in the first place, but basically it's to make it gives something depth, right? So it's like the value, it's like the dark to light area. So when you're looking at something and it's got a shadow on it, it makes it look three-dimensional. So that's going to be what we're going to be practicing today, and this is a good, pretty straightforward way to practice that. So again, if you want to learn how to make something look more realistic that you're drawing, or even something that you're drawing from real life, something from your imagination, learning how to shade and to shade really well will really help you. So with that in mind, one last thing I want to say, besides Boo trying to act like a hot mess behind me, is that if you have any art that you have done before since the quarantine started, whether it was a past project of mine or something you worked on by yourself on your own that you think looks really cool, I would absolutely love for you to send it to me. My goal is to basically put together a video or like a little virtual art gallery of sorts at the end of the year. So again, anything that you could send me, you can send to my email, which will be in the description down below. So that would be really awesome. Doesn't have to be today, but at some point soon, that would be great. So again, stay tuned to see how this goes. Boo, do you want to say bye? Oh, no, he already left. Never mind. Okay, on to the video. Okay, so for this project, you can see that there is a lot of layering along with the shading that I was talking about. But first, I really want to go over what value really is for those of you that might be unsure or might need a reminder. So value is defined as the relative lightness or darkness of a color. So basically, it's a really important tool for an artist because it can help you where the shadows are and where the highlights are on certain objects. So that can make viewers basically think that there is more depth to an object than there really is. Shading is a technique that basically goes hand in hand with value, where you can use a art material such as a pencil, like we'll be doing today, or really any other kind of drawing material, to create a sense of depth using value. So as you can see on these different circles, it goes from just being a very flat circle to being having a little bit more shadow and progressively more shadow and then more. So then it starts to look more realistic because it looks like it's got some sort of dimension to it. So you're going to want to use a pencil and an eraser. You can use a mechanical pencil, but I would suggest using just one that you can sharpen, in which case you would also like to use a sharpener as well. Also, you're going to need a ruler, and if you have a piece of cardstock paper, which is like the thicker paper, that would be a little bit better, but since this is practice, you can always use just regular paper. I would also cut it down to a half sheet of paper just because this project can be a little bit time consuming, so it just goes faster with a half sheet of paper. Okay, so now I'm going to demonstrate two different forms of shading. So the first one is called hatching, and essentially this is where you just take your pencil and you're just using very straight marks close together. You're not pressing down super duper hard. The great thing about hatching is that you can make your lines very close together, or you can start to separate them out a lot more so there's more space in between them. You can also vary the different pressures that you're using with your pencil. So again, and like you see here, I'm pressing down harder to make it look darker, and then I'm progressively just having my pencil barely touch the surface to make it look a lot lighter. And then I'm going back over it until I'm happy with it. So the next
technique I want to show you is called cross-hatching. So essentially it's just like hatching, except you are going over, you're hatching with another set of hatching, but going in the opposite direction. So this is a really great layering tool in the sense that you can make one area look a lot darker just by progressively building it up layer by layer with hatching. So you don't have to press really hard the very first time and expect to get the darkest color possible. Using hatching and cross-hatching is really just a great way to get a lot of different tones. So again, like when you looked at the value scale, when it goes from dark to light, again, you can get a pretty light tone, but then if you, again, start to layer on your cross-hatching, then you can get a lot darker. This technique is great because it can help you achieve not only just really dark and then super light, but a lot of those middle tones in between. So again, we're going to be mainly focusing on hatching, but cross-hatching will just happen naturally as we work through this project. And again, in this example, you can see how, again, the artist used hatching in the very beginning and then just gradually started building it up. As a side note, before you start your final piece, I suggest trying those out on a separate sheet of paper just for practice. So now moving on to the final piece, if you've got a ruler or a 90-degree angle, either of those work. You just want to make sure that you can make some straight lines with it. So the very first part that we're going to start with is basically just creating, and I just kind of freehanded it, a lot of different rectangles and squares that aren't touching, but they're just kind of floating around. And I would try to make some of these fairly large and make some of them kind of tiny just to have a good variation going. But again, this is practice, so it's really up to you of what size you want to make them. Just remember to not make them touching. They can be close or they can be a little bit farther apart, but just keep that in mind. Remember to draw lightly as well, just in case you make a mistake or you do a square rectangle that you're not happy with. So when you feel like you are ready to move on, get just like a regular scrap sheet of paper, burner paper. You're going to use this basically to keep your hand on while you are shading. This is a little trick, or maybe even an essential trick that a lot of artists use to keep your hand from smudging your paper. So yeah, definitely for this, you're going to need that because it is very easy to smudge on this project. So the first thing you're going to start by doing is just starting to shade a little bit on the darker side, the outer edges of your rectangles. And basically we're going to be having it go from dark to light within all of the rectangles and squares that you're making. So one thing I want you guys to try when you're holding your pencil is to not hold your pencil really far down like you normally would for writing, but to hold it a lot farther up for the most part. In the beginning, when you're making your really dark marks, you can hold your pencil kind of in a normal place, but as you are trying to get progressively lighter, I want you to hold your pencil farther back, okay? So just try it. Again, that's why I said to try it on a scrap piece of paper first before you start maybe working on your final one. It's a weird feeling at first, but the really great thing about it is that it gives you some control, but it also makes it a lot easier to lift up your pencil as well. So again, when you're holding your pencil like normal, which is a lot closer to where the lead is, then it's a lot easier to use a lot more pressure and make it darker. But if you want a more sketchy appearance, especially if you want to be able to start lifting your pencil off progressively and making it look a lot lighter, then holding your pencil farther back is just a way simpler way of doing that for a lot of people. So again, it feels weird at first, but just try, give it a chance. So essentially what I'm doing in this square that I'm going to be showing you is what you're going to do in all of them. So again, you're going to start by outlining it a little bit darker along the edges, and then again, using your pencil pretty lightly with your hatching, you're going to start by trying to make it go from a dark to a light. So then you want to be showing value. And so you're going to be wanting to do that on every single side of the rectangle that you're working with. So once you are done with one side, you feel pretty good about it, then you want to turn your paper. And again, making sure to keep your hand on that scrap piece of paper, and then do the exact same thing where again, you're trying to make a nice value scale. So again, you're trying to shade from dark to light. If you feel like the corners aren't looking maybe quite as blended as you would like, you can always go over it a little bit more with a little bit of extra hatching, so that'll make it cross-hatching. And if you find an area where you feel like maybe you applied the pencil a little bit too dark, just take your eraser and just very ever so lightly, just try to, erase a tiny bit of it. And then you can just very lightly go over it again. So that's kind of one reason why, again, you could use colored pencil for this if you really wanted to, but I would suggest using just a regular number 2 pencil at first because it's a lot easier to erase. If you do need to erase, just go ahead, shake your paper off, or maybe even blow on it a little bit. But again, try to not touch your paper too much, or if you do, touch it ever so lightly because, again, it's so easy to get smudges on all over your fingerprints or on the sides of your hand. So again, just be very conscious of that. Now go ahead and do that for all of the other squares. Again, take your time. It's not going to happen in 5 seconds. And remember, this is a practice activity, but once you get good at this, then a lot of your art will improve drastically, especially if you want to become better at drawing. After they're all finished, go back through, double check if you need to erase along any lines where you might have accidentally gone outside of the box, then you can always do that during this stage. But you're going to basically want to do this throughout your whole work. So just, again, try to clean it up when you can. So by looking at my example, you may be able to tell that there are more squares and rectangles that are layered beneath the ones that we already drew. So get your ruler back out, get your pencil back out, make sure that it's sharpened. And you're going to want to go ahead and freehand some more squares and rectangles, basically with inside of the ones that you've already done. So again, this is basically like what you did in the very beginning, except you don't want to run your pencil through those white areas that are separating the squares and rectangles that you previously worked on. So again, if you need to measure things out, be my guest, you can, but you can always just eyeball it if you need to as well. And again, just try to make sure that your lines are light too, so that just in case you accidentally maybe make your line too long for one rectangle, you're not erasing all of the shading that you just did. So as you are continuing to create these rectangles in the boxes, remember that the same rules apply as before when you were creating these rectangular boxes, is that, again, you don't want them to touch each other. You want them to be close to one another, though, but still have some space separating them. You can also make some of the squares or rectangles kind of go off of the page in the sense that you're not going to see every single corner of them. Double check that your pencil is sharp as can be, and then you're going to want to, again, do the exact same process that we did before, where you're just slightly darkening those edges so it's a lot easier for you to see where all of the rectangles and squares you made were, so you don't end up getting confused and coloring in the wrong part. Now you're repeating basically the exact same steps that we did before, where, again, you're going to use your pencil and you're going to be using hatching, and you're just going to be trying to shade in your rectangle. So again, going from dark to light towards the inside. You'll notice that the rectangle you're working with is going to start to look a lot darker than the ones that you had previously done, and that's just because you're just layering on more shading to it, to a part that was already previously shaded. Then go ahead, fill in all those rectangles that you already did. And again, if you feel pretty comfortable with shading, this can be a stopping point for you if you want. But if you want to take it one step further, then you could basically repeat the same thing that we just did, where you're going to be creating a few more rectangles and squares inside of the ones that you just shaded in. So again, if you want to go through with this, which I think is a great idea because it's great practice, then get your ruler back out, put your sleeves up, get your pencil, make sure it's sharp, and then go ahead and start figuring out where you want to put some of those nice rectangles and squares. But again, you're only going to be putting them inside of the now darkest rectangles and squares. Notice how when I am drawing in my new rectangle, I am making sure not to put my line through, again, the very lightest part, which is the white area, but also the second lightest part. So again, you're only drawing these new rectangles inside of the squares and rectangles that you just shaded, not the ones from the very beginning. As you're drawing in these new rectangle boxes, just again, make sure to go back, double check that you're not going over any of the areas that you are not supposed to, again, which is the white spaces and then the next lightest spaces. Once you've got them all drawn in, go ahead and darken the outer edges, just like you did with the other ones, so you can clearly see which one you need to start shading in. And so again, same process restarts itself, where you want to go ahead and use some hatching, which is really becoming cross-hatching now, because you're layering on so much. And again, going from dark to light. And as I said before, this will now become your darkest rectangles. So go ahead and fill in all of your rectangles, and voila! Now you have this pretty cool layered piece that also acted as a very good practice piece for your shading. And as a final step, take your eraser if you need to. Make sure that all of the white areas are as white as they can be. Erase any smudge marks that you might have made, and definitely go wash your hands. But I would absolutely love to see what you guys came up with. Please send it to me. Okay, thank you. Bye.